This man's predictions led governments to sterilize millions of people. Predictions that turned out to be wildly inaccurate. And yet he died a celebrated and decorated scientist. No 20th century intellectual was more successful and more dead wrong. I reviewed a lot of old footage of this guy for this video, and what shocked me is how thoroughly he has won. His attitudes towards humans and children have become the default mindset of my generation. How? How can somebody be so wrong and yet win so thoroughly? Today on Econ Nerds, we examine this man, Paul Ehrlich, how wrong he was, how he never repented nor showed any remorse, and how another academic, Julian Simon, took on Ehrlich and won that battle. But as I discovered in the archives at the University of Maryland, even back then, Simon knew the war against Ehrlich's ideas was lost. As always, more details and all my sources are in a linked Substack post in the description. Paul Ehrlich was a biologist with powers unbeknownst to most scientists. Good looks and the ability to talk to other humans.
Mr. Wattenberg is essentially in the position of the person saying, well, you're trying to sell me insurance, but I have life insurance, but I've never needed any before.
His origin story, as he tells it in his famous book, was in India, where he was shocked to find people, well, being people. My God, they are eating, sleeping, arguing, and worst of all, peeing and pooping. Ehrlich was frankly frightened. So frightened that he dedicated his long life to stopping people from making more people.
Population situation is bad. Reduce the size of the population, bring the birth rate down.
It's just too damn many people.
He thought overpopulation would be the end of humanity, and he made prediction after prediction about it. A minimum of 10 million people will starve to death during each year of the 1970s. So how many actually died? 20 times less than he predicted. That's not a small mistake. That's like looking at Margot Robbie and saying, yeah, she probably weighs about 2,000 pounds. Afterwards, an embarrassed Ehrlich admits he was wrong and apologizes. I'm joking, he doubled down. In 1989, he claims prospects for famine are even more imminent. He then specifically calls out India, which, if you remember, he really doesn't like because it's filled with his least favorite thing.
Just too damn many people.
Ehrlich claims India faces catastrophic problems. Let's see how that turned out. Now, obviously, there's been crises and difficulties, but let's look at life expectancy. That's gone up. Did living standards fall? Maybe. Oh no, sorry, hold on. I have that upside down. So unless you count becoming the third largest economy and the next superpower as catastrophic problems, Ehrlich was wrong again. But that's not even his worst country-based prediction. He claimed there was a 50-50 chance England would not exist in 2000. Let's check on that one. Hey Ben, it's Matt.
Hey!
Can you do me a favor and look outside real fast?
Okay.
Yeah, does England still exist?
It would appear so, unfortunately.
Now I can totally understand how Ehrlich came to his views. He based his projections on nature where insects suffer from overpopulation. And in the 1960s, it seemed like humans might be on the same track as famines were prevalent. But thankfully for us, humans aren't insects. Humans do science. They come up with inventions, some large and some small, like ways to get more food out of less resources.
Ehrlich compared population growth to food supply growth and concluded we didn't have enough food to feed future populations. A man named Norman Borlaug saw the same thing and said, we can innovate our way out of this. He came up with a number of technologies that greatly increased crop yields. They started to bear fruit in the 1960s and were collectively called the Green Revolution.
And instead of celebrating it, Paul Ehrlich dismissed it.
The most recent indications are that the so-called Green Revolution is going to be less of a success than we thought it was going to be.
You sure about that? You sure about that?
In 1997, Ehrlich changes tactics. Instead of dismissing the Green Revolution, he calls it a chimera.
Which I had to look up. A chimera is a half-goat, half-lion creature from Greek mythology.
So I assume he meant definition 2, something that is hoped for but is impossible to achieve. Let's fast forward again on our Green Revolution graph.
So I wouldn't call something that kept going for 60 years into the present impossible to achieve. Less a chimera and more like England, improbably still existing.
Despite being wrong again and again, Ehrlich remained celebrated. It turns out confidence matters more than correctness. See Every Politician Ever and the fact that I'm married. Speaking of politicians, Ehrlich had advice for them. He wanted to stigmatize large families.
No intelligent, patriotic American family ought to have more than 2 children, preferably 1.
Change the culture.
He ought to make the FCC see to it that large families are always treated in a negative light.
If you miss that, he wants the government to control the media and make sure large families are always portrayed poorly.
He wanted taxes on children, cribs, diapers. If these didn't work, he wanted the government to mandate the number of children people could have.
You would increase taxes on people with children rather than decrease them, since when they have the children, they require more services. If that doesn't work, then you'll have the government legislating the size of the family. And people say, oh, that's impossible. Government can never intrude and tell you how many children to have. Well, I got news. You know, it intruded a long time ago and told you how many wives you can have. And there's not the slightest question that if we don't get the population under control with voluntary means, that in the not too distant future, the government will simply tell you how many children you can have and throw you in jail if you have too many.
Many countries followed his prescriptions and adopted draconian population control policies. China limited families to 1 child. The result, over 20 million missing baby girls. Families who wanted sons selectively aborted daughters. And in darker cases, resorted to infanticide. In the 1970s, India pursued extreme population control, making housing and benefits only available to those who got sterilized.
More than 8 million sterilizations were performed, many forcibly. The people, in the words of one family planning expert, were treated like cattle.
In 2011, author Mara Hvensendahl confronted Ehrlich about sex-selective abortion and sterilization. Even then, Ehrlich still defended both policies. Although he did clarify he wanted sterilization to be reversible, but still mandatory. By 1980, Paul Ehrlich was a success beyond any scholar's wildest dreams. He was a celebrity. The 2 biggest countries in the world had policies based on his ideas. And those ideas had permeated the culture. Sitcom families were now smaller, like he wanted. In movies, humanity's future, which used to be a utopia, was now a wasteland. He was a towering figure within and outside his field, with the accolades and sideburns to prove it. But then, one plucky economist took him on, Julian Simon. Simon had a different perspective on people.
Yes, I do like people, Bob. I like them, I also admire them.
And here's what he thought about large families.
Unfortunately, I have no brothers, I have no sisters. And when I was growing up, the sweetest word that I could hear, my brother or my sister. And when my children say that about each other, it makes my heart go cut.
Now, his origin story I didn't even know until researching this video, and I found it fascinating. He was initially an advocate for population control. He even went to the government to get a grant for it. But then he had his mind changed by a higher power, the economics literature. He knew the data didn't show that countries with growing populations were doing worse. Population and prosperity seemed unrelated. As the saying from another famous economist goes,
when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir?
Julian Simon changed his mind. Population growth wasn't the enemy. And he tried to change Ehrlich's mind too, but no luck. So he thought, well, maybe I can make some money here. So him and Ehrlich made a bet in 1980. It was a small bet. It was only on the future of humanity.
The bet they come up with is weird, and it's not one that you could find here. They bet on metal. Let me explain.
Ehrlich has a finite mindset. He thinks there's a fixed amount of stuff on Earth.
Like chips in a poker tournament, and we are using them up. Can't go on.
Fair enough, but there's a different way you could think about things. Julian Simon says the only resource that really matters is human ingenuity.
And therefore, we can admire people in the large as well as individually for being creators more than they are destroyers.
Simon's thinking is more like the board game Settlers of Catan, where more and more is produced as the game goes on.
If we start running out of physical resources, clever humans will find replacements or use the existing resources more efficiently.
Now, most people think Ehrlich's right. Resources are clearly finite. But let me give you an example that shows the modern world isn't necessarily a zero-sum game.
England in the 1700s was basically a mountain of coal with some pubs on it. Then they became an empire in the 1800s by burning all that coal. They used it for trains, for ships, for charcoal pens, which they deployed to add the letter U to random words. Now let's look at England today, which, as we've covered, still exists. The empire built on coal no longer uses it.
Are they richer or poorer as a result? Richer, despite the best efforts of their recent governments.
England economized and used substitutes for coal, not because the coal ran out, but because they developed cheaper, cleaner alternatives.
How one thinks about resources is core to the zero-sum poker chip mindset of Ehrlich versus the settlers of Catan, humans can create abundance mindset of Simon.
So they bet on resources, 5 metals handpicked by Ehrlich. If the metals go up in price over the 1980s, that means they got scarce. If they go down in price, that means we've found substitutes or economized on their use. They bet $200 on each metal, the payout determined by which way the price went and by how much. So what happened? Well, that's why I'm here in Maryland. See, Simon won the bet, resoundingly so, as all of Ehrlich's handpicked metals went down in price. Ehrlich does pay up, but reluctantly so. He sends no note and makes his wife sign the check. So we know he's big mad. But what about Julian Simon? That's why I spent a whole day with Julian Simon's letters at the University of Maryland Library. Did he gloat? Not really. There is letter after letter congratulating him. The closest thing I found to gloating or boasting on Simon's part is his offer to take on more bets. Now, no one accepted it, but maybe they should have, because Simon got real lucky. Chromium and nickel broke right in time for him. And when Hannah Ritchie analyzed long-run data, it's about 50-50 on who wins, depending on which decade is chosen. Now, Hannah Ritchie still thinks Simon won the bet, because ultimately this is about resources. Are we finding more or running out? And to answer that, you don't need prices, you need quantities. This is what that looks like. Supply of these metals has exploded even if price hasn't. That means as demand surged because population grew, supply was able to keep up and keep prices stable. This is the same pattern that we saw earlier with food. As demand grew, we figured out how to make more. Resources may be finite, but human creativity isn't. As Julian Simon always said, humans are more than a mouth. They have a brain too. Simon may have won the bet, but he lost the war. And it's actually apparent in his correspondence from the time that he knew he was losing. Ehrlich's fear-mongering about the future is the dominant mode of thinking today. I didn't realize how much I myself was affected until it was too late. I want you to watch this clip of Ehrlich talking about childless couples.
If they don't have children, people say, gee, they must be sterile. They never say, gee, maybe they like good wine and going to the theater and so on. They prefer that to scraping diapers.
Now, I don't think childless couples should be stigmatized, but if you look at today, it's the reverse of that clip. They're envied. People see them and say, hey, they're enjoying life without kids to ruin it. That's how I thought. I thought a kid would be the end of my fun, my freedom. But it's not. It's a cliche, but having a kid is amazing. And Julian Simon knew it. In his correspondence, there are references to his kids and the joy they bring him. I'm in my 40s, and I don't have a single friend with more than 2 kids. Most of them have 0. Paul Ehrlich and the Zero Population Growth Campaign would be proud. I'm definitely not telling you how to live your life. Everyone's free to do as they choose, no judgment from me. But I just want to share that the biggest regret of my life is delaying children. In fact, that might be my only regret, except how I used to dress. And I'm incredibly thankful for the one kid I do have. In fact, I probably should get out of this archive and back to him.
It's a cliche, but kids are a joy. See, look how happy he is to get this memento from the Julian Simon archive.
Dean, that is a letter from Julian Simon's financial advisor from when he got the check. Incredible piece of history.
For the past 2 years, my wife and I have spent every extra dollar we've earned on rounds of IVF, unsuccessfully, unfortunately. And maybe I shouldn't reveal that in an educational economics video, but I don't want people to make the same mistakes I did. I don't want Ehrlich to win. So if you don't want children, that's fine. But if you do, don't hesitate. And I hope that one day your child and mine know the words, my brother
or my sister.
Thanks for watching, and if you're wondering why people make these doomsday predictions and how they actually profit off those predictions, I cover that in this linked video.